Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast, and thank you for being with me today. I do pray that today's podcast will be helpful and encouraging to you in some way. And if you were with me last week, you know I began a new little series of episodes that I entitled Help, My Wife Doesn't Want Sex, in which I'm responding to a man who sent me a letter asking for help because he wants sex and his wife isn't as interested in sex. And of course, this creates a kind of dilemma in the context of the marriage. And I think that this issue is so common for so many marriages. And by the way, this is going to be a 3-part series, 3 episodes. And last week I shared the introductory, just the first episode of that new series. And in response to episode 1, I received a letter from a female listener. She's a wife. It's a pretty long letter. It's actually almost 3 pages long. And she titled her letter, A Wife's Perspective to Podcast Help, My Wife Doesn't Want Sex. And as she begins her letter, she says, I guess you could call my letter Help from the Wife Who Doesn't Want Sex. So I just thought her letter was very interesting and intriguing. So I decided to go ahead and read the letter to you. I'm just going to go ahead and make an episode out of her letter. And I'm going to kind of let her letter stand on its own, because it's pretty long. By the time I read this, I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take. But I thought it would be interesting to many of our listeners. And I think a whole lot of ladies will be able to relate to what this woman is writing in her letter. And I think it'll be helpful to guys to hear this woman's heart and her viewpoint from a female point of view. So I'm going to go ahead and read this letter. And then at the end, I'm going to share just a few comments in response to the letter. And by the way, I just want to mention, and I've said this before, but I just want to say it again with absolute clarity, that I reserve the right, when I get comments and letters and questions and notes and different things in response to the podcast, I reserve the right to reference these letters or to read these letters, especially if I think they will be helpful and encouraging or insightful to a large majority of the listeners of the Power of Purity podcast. And I will do so unless you specifically ask me when you write to me, do not read my letter on the podcast. Do not reference my letter. Don't talk about my letter. Then I will respect you and I will not reference your letter. But unless you tell me that, I reserve the right to do so, because I feel like we're kind of like a family and we're a community and we're on this journey together and we're trying to learn together. So I really do think it's helpful to get these letters and these notes and these voices and hearts and different viewpoints and feelings, men and women, and we kind of learn from each other. And of course, I promise you that when I do so, I will always do so with complete anonymity. So I won't give the person's name who wrote me this letter. So, of course, you're very protected. No one will ever know that you wrote the letter. But anyway, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and read this letter now. And this lady says this: To Tony Ingrassia, in response to your letter and podcast, Help, My Wife Doesn't Want Sex, I guess you could call this letter Help from the Wife Who Doesn't Want Sex. This could have been written by my own husband. His sweet and obvious love for his wife and family, and his frustration with not enough mutually enjoyable sex, is a mirror of my own relationship with my husband. We've been married for 18 years and have dealt with this issue on and off again for the better part of our marriage. I thought maybe my perspective would help not only this man, but the many, many people who struggle with this, as well as my own marriage. I hope that putting my thoughts into writing will give me clarity as I seek to strengthen my sexual relationship with my husband. Let me be very clear. My husband is very aware of me and my wants and my needs. Sexually, he is patient, willing to please me in any way, and responsive to the corrections, desires, or stops that I may give him. Sex should be amazing and perfect in every way, and it is some of the time, but most of the time I just do not want sex. It has nothing to do with my love for him or my desire for him as a person or as my husband or as the father to our 5 children. You pointed out how important it is for a man to be desired sexually by his wife. But how do I make that desire come more frequently when I just don't want or enjoy sex more than once or twice a month? By the way, I interrupt the letter because that's the very point that I'm going to comment on a little bit at the end of this letter. She's asking, how do I make myself have more desire for sex when I only have desire once or twice a month? Now, continuing with her letter, I pray for more sexual desire. I keep myself in shape physically and healthy because I know when I feel good about my body and myself, I feel more sexy and more excited to share myself with my husband. I am not withholding my desire, my sexuality, in any way. In fact, when I get a sex dream or sexual thought about him, I always try to share it and think to myself, never suppress a sexual thought, which is probably the exact opposite of what my husband has to think to himself. But the truth is, they just do not come frequently enough for my husband. I want to desire him more. I want to be more attracted to him sexually. I just don't know how to make that happen. And because of this disparity between different levels of desire and expectation for sex, it has become a stumbling block in our marriage and our relationship. And I told my husband just last week that I hate sex. It's not actually sex I hate. It's that the only thing wrong in our marriage is sex. And it's brought up more and more and more frequently to the point that I hate discussing sex. I hate bringing it up. I hate the pressure it makes me feel, the fakeness I feel in bringing up sex and pretending I want it when I don't. There's so much pressure on me and our relationship now associated with sex that I don't like it. And the more my husband brings up sex, the more averse to sex I become. He does this through different ways, by picking out a marriage book that's all about sex, by reading articles together on how important sex is for men, etc., etc. I know deep down that he truly wants to improve our marriage, but it feels like the only way he is trying to do this is through sex. That the only way he measures the health of my love for him and the health of our marriage is through the frequency of good sex. We have sex at least twice weekly. I understand how physically sex is a necessity for him, and I think for most men. But having sex isn't enough. I have to be fully involved. He wants me to enjoy this as much as he does. But I do not. I enjoy sex maybe once or twice a month. The other times we have sex is because I know it's important for him emotionally and essential for him physically. But I don't know how to make myself enjoy it more. I've tried to explain that I enjoy being with him. I enjoy sex because he likes it, but I'm not enjoying it to the level that it's fulfilling a personal need, except maybe once or twice a month. And turning the page now to page 2 of her letter, I've compared it to eating. Sometimes you're just so full that the thought of eating anything else, even if it's ice cream, and I love ice cream, but I don't want it when I'm already so full ice cream doesn't sound good at all. And I am already so full of plenty of sex for my own physical needs that it isn't even appealing. It's like shoveling in ice cream when you feel like vomiting. Because he doesn't want me to ever feel pressured or compelled into sex, he rarely brings it up. But this actually puts more pressure on me, because now I not only have to do something I don't really like, sex, I have to instigate it. Plus, if I just say something like, "Do you want to have sex?" he'll usually answer something like, "Well, do you?" I don't want to if you're not going to be into it. What am I supposed to say to that? No, I don't. I'm doing this for you, just like you do the dishes for me. Not because you love dishes, because you love me. Why can't that just be good enough? I'm sorry, I'm kind of bouncing around, but about a year ago I was frustrated with my husband finding a job. He has done very well for our family and has owned multiple different businesses, but for about a year he was lost trying to decide what to do, and we were living off of savings, and I was getting upset about his lack of working. I kept bringing it up and nagging him about getting a job or starting another business, and our marriage was getting unhappier. Then I read a book or an article about strengthening marriage. He compared it to getting a room painted. The author said something to the tune of, if you know that your husband knows you want the room painted, and you know he loves you, then never bring it up again. Instead, focus on loving your spouse, and the room will get painted. I tried this with my husband. It's been over a year now since I stopped nagging him about getting a job, and instead I focused on positive things about him and our family. In this time, he has gotten a job and started a business. My advice to the husband in Help, My Wife Doesn't Want Sex, is to stop bringing it up. I don't mean to stop initiating or asking for sex or whatever frequency works for your marriage, because I like it when my husband initiates sex. It's less stressful for me. I mean, stop bringing up sex as an issue in your marriage. It obviously has become an issue. I promise you that your wife knows that you want more sex. Stop asking her how you can make her enjoy it more. Stop asking her what you can do to make her want sex more. If you feel like she's having sex just because she knows you want it, take that as a way of her showing her love for you. The amount of times I have sex with my husband because I love him and I know he needs it physically and emotionally outnumber the times I have sex because I desire it at least 50-1. I know in my marriage the times our sexual relationship is the worst are the times when my husband talks about it the most. And when sex is the best is when I feel the best about my marriage and myself. So don't make sex a focus. Instead, focus on all the wonderful things about your wife. Let her see and hear all the ways that you value her besides sex. I know when my husband brings up sex so much, I feel like it is the only thing he values about me. And then I feel pretty crummy because obviously I'm not that great about it, or it wouldn't have become such an issue in the first place. I feel much more secure in my marriage, my life, and sex when I feel valued by my husband in the things that are important to me. I'm not sure what is important to Help's wife, and I assume there that she's referencing the letter that the man wrote me, Help, My Wife Doesn't Want Sex. She goes on to say, but for me, when he cares about what I'm learning about, currently I'm learning about the stock market, and when I talk to him about it, I feel like he's annoyed and not proud of me. That's hurtful to me and to our intimacy. The times when he expresses gratitude or pride about my willingness to learn new things, those are times he is much more desirable to me than when he acts annoyed or uninterested. When he notices little things I do for the kids and for him, like make a special treat or write a note, and thanks me for that. When he takes me to do something I like and he doesn't like, for example, dancing, that's much more desirable to me than him taking me to a movie. When he puts effort into something that's important to me, even if it's hard for him, like if he writes me a note, I know he hates to write because he has bad spelling. And now turning the page to page 3 of her letter. But I love language and English, so the written word speaks to me. I just know that for myself, when my husband stops concentrating on sex and starts concentrating on me as a person, non-sexually, I want to be more intimate with him than when I feel like he only loves me because he loves having sex with me. A warning, this can take a long time. When I feel like my husband is doing something nice for me just because he wants to have sex that night, it doesn't work. This needs to be a sustained effort. a true showing of love for your wife because you love her as a person beyond you loving her sexually. You probably already feel that way towards her, but maybe sex as a physical need is getting in the way of her feeling your true, deep love for her as a person. Beyond being a wife, beyond being a lover, beyond being a mother, I am an individual with amazing talents and qualities that are often put on the back burner because of the fact that I'm a wife and a mother. When I feel truly loved for who I am as an individual, I am better able to love my husband. I hope this is helpful to have the perspective of a woman in a very similar situation to the one described by the man who wrote, "Help." What we all truly want is to be loved. I know we can get this love from God, and I turn to Him frequently. We also need this love from our spouse. A quick word on pornography. My husband occasionally views pornography and constantly struggles against this horrible addiction. This has never been a consistent daily, weekly, or even monthly problem. He has never been unfaithful to me with another woman, or been to strip clubs or any other thing other than pornography. He is open with me about it, which I appreciate. But I also appreciated what you shared about your meditation, that men and women are responsible for their own sexual purity with or without the help or participation of your wife. Sometimes my husband feels like if we just had sex more, his temptation would just go away. This is untrue. More sex does not equal less Satan. The only way to overcome pornography or any other sexual temptation is with the help of Jesus Christ. Please do not give in to viewing pornography. It is so hurtful. It makes me feel like my husband is saying, "You are not worth my time or effort." It makes me feel objectified and reiterates to my mind that the only thing he loves or values about me is sex, that he cares more about sex and his physical desires than he does about me. I logically know he is not thinking this. In fact, he tells me often he thinks, "I don't want to bother my wife," or "This way I'm not bugging or pressuring her." But I just wanted to mention this. I know there are a lot of people who struggle with pornography, and I appreciate you keeping the accountability on them where it should be, while at the same time I want to support and help my husband in any way that I can to overcome this temptation. I am not capable of removing the temptation and sin from him. Sex is not enough. My love for him is not enough. Only Christ is enough, and him turning to God is the only way. Thank you for your podcast and helping others heal through Christ. And that is the end of her letter. So let me just say wow to this sister. Thank you for taking the time to write such a thoughtful response and such a lengthy response to the podcast. I deeply appreciate it. I think it's very meaningful, and I think it's very helpful, and I think it'll be very encouraging and insightful for a lot of men to hear this letter from a woman. I've given this metaphor before, but if you could imagine kind of like a child seeing a saltwater fish tank for the first time, they might go up to the fish tank and they'd be fascinated and smush their nose and their mouth against the glass, and they're looking in, and their eyes are wide-eyed with wonder, and they just can't believe it. It's like there's another world in there that they've never seen before. And here's these red and blue and yellow and green neon fish, and they just can't believe it. And in a way, I feel like that's what this letter is. It's a kind of gift for us men because it lets us come up to the world of a woman, the soul of a woman, the heart and mind of a woman, and smush our nose against the glass and look in the other side, holy cow, what's in there? That this is another world that I'm not sure that I understand. And so this letter is a kind of gift because it gives us a glimpse of the heart and the soul and the mind and the thoughts of a woman. And I think that's totally awesome, and it's deeply appreciated. So I say to my dear sister, thank you so much for taking the time to write this letter. And I kind of intend for the letter to just stand on its own. In fact, I thought about just reading the letter and not even commenting. That's it. But I do want to take the time. I feel like I could say so much in response, but I'm going to share just a few thoughts in response to this letter. And if I could, I'd like to observe that there's 3 primary observations I have about her letter that I'd like to comment on. And the first one is this. There's kind of a theme throughout the letter that she reflects on several times over and over again, that she wants her husband to notice her and appreciate her and affirm her and delight in her because of who she is as a person and not just because of sex. So she says things like this in the letter. Focus on all the wonderful things about me. Let me see and hear all the ways that you value me besides sex. She says that she wants to know that her husband values her and respects her, for example, for the things that she's learning about, such as the stock market. And she appreciates the times that he expresses gratitude or he's proud of her because of her willingness to learn new things, or the times that he notices the little things that she does for him and the kids, such as making a special treat or writing a note and giving her a thank you, or doing something for her that he's not really even that interested in doing, but he's willing to do it because he knows that's something that's important to her, such as a willingness to go dancing, or a willingness to write her a note, even though she knows that he doesn't like to write notes. And then she says on the last page of the letter, I just know that for myself, when my husband stops concentrating on sex and starts concentrating on me as a person non-sexually, I want to be more intimate with him than when I feel like he only loves me because he loves having sex with me. And then she goes on to say that beyond being a wife and being a lover and being a mother, she happens to be an individual with these amazing talents and qualities that she often has to put on the back burner so that she can be a wife and a mother. And she says that when she feels truly loved for who she is as an individual, that she's better able to love her husband. So I just want to acknowledge her point here. I think it's a very significant point, and I think it's a point that we as guys need to pay attention to, that there are many aspects to our wives as a person and as an individual, and it makes sense to me that my wife wants to be known and respected and affirmed in all these different ways, and she wants to be appreciated for all these different things, and not just appreciated because she happens to be the one person on planet Earth that I'm able to have legal sex with in the eyes of God. So I see that that's a primary thing that she's asking for in her letter. It's like the heart of Eve is saying to her husband, notice me, respect me, affirm me, appreciate me, tell me thank you. Notice the things that I do to go above and beyond the call of duty to take care of you and our kids and our family and our household all the time. Like I have way more value than just being your sex partner. So it's important for me to know that you know that and you recognize that and you appreciate that. So that's the first point she makes that I feel like I just wanted to observe. And then there's a second point that she makes that I feel like she mentions over and over again in several different ways throughout the letter. And the essence of the second point is something like she's saying, quit making such a big deal about sex. Don't talk about sex so much. Don't bring it up so much. And quit pushing on the topic of sex all the time. So she says things like this in her letter. It's not actually the sex that I hate. It's that the one thing wrong in our marriage is sex. And it's brought up more and more and more frequently to the point that I hate discussing sex. I hate bringing it up. I hate the pressure that it makes me feel. I hate the fakeness that I feel bringing up sex and pretending I want it when I don't. There's so much pressure on me and our relationship associated with sex that I don't like it. And the more my husband brings up sex, the more adverse I become to it. And then she goes on to say, because he doesn't want me to ever feel pressured or compelled into sex, he rarely brings it up, but this actually puts more pressure on me, because now I not only have to do something I don't really like, which is sex, but I have to instigate it. So then she goes on to say, my advice to the husband who wrote the letter, help, my wife doesn't want sex, is to stop bringing up sex so much. I mean, stop bringing up sex as an issue in your marriage. It's obviously become an issue. I promise that your wife knows that you want more sex. Stop asking her how you can make her enjoy it more, and stop asking her what you can do to make her want sex more. And then finally she says, just stop making sex such a focus. So this is my second observation. I just see that this woman is making an appeal to back off of the topic of sex. Quit bringing it up so much. Quit making such a deal about it. Quit making it such a focus in your relationship and in your marriage. Because she says that this constant focus on this topic actually pushes her away and makes her feel more pressure and makes her feel more frustrated, and actually is counterproductive because it diminishes her desire and her interest in sex. So I just want to say that I recognize that's a primary thing that she's saying in her letter, and I just want to acknowledge that. But with that being said, I do want to share maybe one or two thoughts about that. The first one is just, I feel like there's just a little bit of a contradiction in what she says in one sense, because she's saying, don't bring it up so much. Don't pressure me about it. Don't talk about it so much. Back off. But then at one point in the letter, she says that her husband therefore does that. So because he doesn't want me to feel pressured or compelled into sex, he rarely brings it up. So her husband is doing the very thing that she's asking for. But then she goes on to say, but this actually puts more pressure on me, because now I not only have to do something I don't really like, which is sex, but I have to instigate it. So in a sense, I'm just observing, it feels like she's putting her husband in a little bit of double jeopardy, because she's asking him to not bring it up so much. But then she acknowledges that when he doesn't bring it up, it actually puts even more pressure on her. So it feels a little bit like damned if you do and damned if you don't. So if you bring it up, you're pressuring me. But if you don't bring it up, you're pressuring me. So I don't know what to do with that. I'm just observing that. It feels just a little bit unfair to her husband, because it kind of feels like no matter what he does, she's interpreting it as a kind of pressure. So my final comment on that point is simply, I would advocate for the importance of honesty and transparency and communication. Put all your cards on the table, and I think the healthy thing to do, hopefully, is to be able to talk about this. And I know that I've mentioned this before, but I'll just mention again that earlier in the podcast, episode 35 through episode 40, I did a 6-part series of episodes called The Sexual Alliance. And in this teaching, I encourage a married couple to hammer out or forge together what I call a sexual alliance, which is essentially that every couple is going to have to find a sexual rhythm that's going to work for them within the context of their marriage. And the only way that I think a couple can figure out a sexual alliance together is that they're going to have to talk about this ultimately. And I'd advocate that by not talking about it, now there's this vagueness and this ambiguity and this confusion, and the right hand doesn't really know what the left hand's thinking and vice versa. And so there's disorientation, and the whole thing becomes shrouded kind of with mystery and confusion, and I don't know what you're thinking, but I know what I want, and therefore I'm confused, and should I ask? But if I ask, you're pressured, so I won't ask, but that makes you feel pressured, so now I'm confused, and I don't know what to do, and it goes on and on and on, and becomes like a snowball going down a hill, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and more weird and dysfunctional all the time. So I would advocate that there's a great value for just putting your cards on the table, talking about this, trying to hammer it out together, come to an agreement. What do you need and prefer? What do I need and prefer? Can we compromise? Can we work together? Can we apply Ephesians 5:21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ? Can we find a kind of mutual submission and find a rhythm that kind of works for us together? And that way now, I know what you're thinking and feeling, and you know what I'm thinking and feeling, and we've kind of forged an agreement, and we both know what to expect and kind of how to handle this. And I think that might relieve a lot of this pressure of this unknown and this weirdness. So I highly recommend that you listen to the Sexual Alliance episodes 35 through 40, and then try to work through this together and come to a more meaningful place where you can share your hearts and your minds with one another, your needs and your desires and your preferences, and you can work together and hopefully figure out a kind of rhythm together that's hopefully going to help you be healthier together and eliminate a lot of this weirdness and this misunderstanding and this pressure that becomes very counterproductive and unhealthy. And with that being said, it brings me to the third observation that I wanted to make about her letter, and it concerns this point that she makes several times throughout the letter, where I believe that with very honest sincerity, she is saying, I wish I had more desire. I want to have more desire, but I don't know what to do about that. She says on the first page, you pointed out how important it is for a man to be desired sexually by his wife, but how do I make that desire come more frequently when I just don't want or enjoy sex more than once or twice a month? I pray for more sexual desire. And then she says, I want to desire him more. I want to be more attracted to him sexually. I just don't know how to make that happen. It's as if she's saying, I wish I was more sexual. I wish I had more desire. I'm willing to have sex with my husband because it meets his needs, this emotional need, this physical need that he has. So I'm willing to do it with him. And I wish I had more desire, but I just don't. I have desire maybe once or twice a month, and that's it. But I don't have desire more than I do have desire. So what do I do? And how do I make myself have more desire? And so I want to speak to that. And I just want to suggest something here. And I have a couple different thoughts. So my first thought is this. Just for the fun of it, let's pretend. Let's just pretend for a moment. And if, like a magic genie appeared out of a lamp and said, I will give you a wish. And if you want me to, I can snap my fingers and I can create in you sexual desire. And I can turn you into a woman of passion and desire and eroticism and sexuality. And you will enjoy these things, and your sexual desire and passion will be equivalent to your husband, so you can enter into this with him. Or if God offered you this opportunity to become a much more sexualized woman, a woman who enjoys sex and passion and eroticism and had more desire, if God said, here's a button, and if you push this button, you'll become more sexual. And so my question for the ladies listening to this is this. Would you push the button? If there was a way for you to become more sexual than you've ever been, more comfortable with sex, and more passionate, and more erotic, and more into it, and more turned on, would you push that button if there was such a button? And I'm going to get to something here in a moment because I think there might kind of be a button. I'm going to give you ladies a suggestion. My second thought, though, is this, and I just want to reference the book of the Song of Solomon in the Bible, or also it's called the Song of Songs. And something very interesting that I had never heard before came to my attention recently And you guys know what the Song of Songs is. It's the book in the Bible about erotic love, and it's this young couple who God has brought together, and they're entering into their relationship and into marriage, and they're entering into their honeymoon and their wedding suite, their honeymoon suite. And the book is all about this language and them talking to each other with this beautiful poetry. And their language is very erotic, and it's full of anticipation and desire and passion and eroticism. And many people are surprised, if not shocked, that somehow this book made it into the Holy Bible. And the thing that I learned that was very intriguing, and I never knew this and I've never heard this after being a Christian for over 40 years, that the woman in the Song of Solomon, and by the way, in the context of the book, she actually talks more than her husband talks. She talks more than her lover talks. So her voice is the primary voice in the book, and that of all the women in all the Bible, from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation, that she has more words spoken in the Bible, more words said about her than any other female in the entire Bible. She is given more words, she's given more ink on the pages of the Bible than any other woman, including the Proverbs 31 woman, which is held up to Christian women as the ideal of what a Christian woman is supposed to be. And you guys don't know this yet, but I just finished an interview with a very beautiful, awesome, intriguing guest, and the episodes are coming up in the near future, and I interviewed a gal named Dr. Julie Slattery, and she's pretty awesome. She's written 10 books. She's a Christian author. She has a ministry called Authentic Intimacy, and she's a person of reputation because she actually worked for Focus on the Family for several years, and she ascended to the respected position of being the co-host on the Focus on the Family radio broadcast. And she felt called by God to leave that position at Focus on the Family to start this ministry called Authentic Intimacy, specifically to help women become more comfortable with sexuality and to answer questions and issues that women struggle with in their marriages and with relationship and with sex. So she very much focuses on the topic of sexuality with women. And when I was interviewing Dr. Julie Slattery, she said something very interesting. She said for years and years and years, she heard over and over again that she should be like the Proverbs 31 woman. God wants you to be the Proverbs 31 woman. And Proverbs 31 was held up to her as the ideal of what a Christian woman should be. And she said, not once ever in my Christian life did anybody ever hold up to me the Song of Solomon and say, you should be like this woman in the Bible. When in fact, in the Song of Solomon, this woman is given more words and more ink than the Proverbs 31 woman. So she said, which woman should I be like as a Christian woman? There's even more in the Bible about the Song of Solomon, the Shulamite woman, than there is the Proverbs 31 woman. So I just thought that that was very interesting. So the final thought that I want to share is this, and I want to share with you ladies 2 different resources that I'm going to recommend to people that are way, way more qualified than I am to help women with this issue of sexual desire. But what I'm saying and what I suspect is I think that if a woman is willing to work on this issue, that there are reasons maybe sometimes that she doesn't feel that sexual and that she doesn't have that much desire. So if you're willing to explore this and go on a journey of discovery, a kind of quest, and try to figure out, is there a way that I can learn to become more sexual, that I can learn to be more comfortable with sexuality, that I can blossom and bloom in my sexuality? Is there a button that God has for me to push that will make me more sexual and more sensual and more passionate and more excited and enthusiastic about sex than I've ever been before? And so those two resources, number one, I just mentioned, are Dr. Julie Slattery, and she has a ministry and a website called Authentic Intimacy. So check that out, AuthenticIntimacy.com. And as I mentioned, I have a two-part episode, a two-part interview coming up where you're going to hear from Dr. Julie on the Power of Purity podcast. But she's written 10 books, and she kind of specializes in helping women become healthier in and around their relationship with their own body and with sexuality and sex and intimacy in the context of their relationship with their husbands. And just listen to this list of the 10 books that this woman has written. Book number 1, Rethinking Sexuality. The subtitle is God's Design for Sex and Why It Matters. Book number 2 is Passionate Pursuit. What kind of love are you making? Book 3, Sex and the Single Girl. Book 4, Finding the Hero in Your Husband. Book 5, 25 questions that you're afraid to ask about love, sex, and intimacy. Book 6, Surprised by the Healer. The subtitle is Embracing Hope for Your Broken Journey. Book 7, No More Headaches. Enjoying Sex and Intimacy in Your Marriage. Book 8, Pulling Back the Shades. Erotica, Intimacy, and the Longings of a Woman's Heart. Book 9, Beyond the Masquerade. Unveiling the Authentic You, and Book 10, Guilt-Free Motherhood, Parenting with Godly Wisdom. And in addition to these 10 books that Dr. Julie has written, she also has an aspect of her ministry, and I don't know exactly what this is, but it's called Passion Pursuit. And it's a Bible study, it's a workshop, it's a conference, it's some kind of a mechanism, a workshop that women go through that she's written specifically for women to help women find the button that they can push that will help them become more sexual and more erotic and more passionate than they've ever been before. So check this out, Dr. Julie Slattery, Authentic Intimacy, and check out her books and check out her podcast. And check out her program that she calls Passion Pursuit. And there might just be a button in there that's going to help you get more turned on than you've ever been before. And the second resource I want to mention is a guest that I interviewed several episodes ago, and that is Shannon Ethridge. And that was episode 150 and 151. So if you haven't heard those episodes, I would encourage you to go back and listen to those episodes, Shannon Ethridge. And probably one of the most popular books ever written in the Christian community concerning the topic of men and sex was written by a man named Stephen Otterburn, and the book is Every Man's Battle. So Shannon Ethridge is a contemporary and an associate of Stephen Otterburn, and she wrote the woman's version of the book, and it's called Every Woman's Battle. So Shannon Ethridge has her own website and her own resources and her own books that she's written, and you can find her at shannonethridge.com. And by the way, that's ShannonEthridge.com, shannonethridge.com. And she's written several beautiful books. One is called The Sexually Confident Wife. One is called The Passion Principles. One is called The Fantasy Fallacy. And Shannon also offers conferences and workshops and things like this for women, where she brings women into her conferences, and she, in a sense, speaks to women and trains women and teaches women and encourages women and exhorts women to enter into the fullness of their femininity and their sexuality and their intimacy and their passion. And in a sense, she helps women give themselves permission to be more sexual than they've ever been before. And she has 2 different workshops that accomplish this purpose specifically. One is called Women at the Well, and that's for women only. But then she also does a workshop called the Sexually Confident Couple, and this is for husbands and wives together who are ready to work on this issue and who are seeking to be more connected on a deeper level and more intimate and more available to one another, more present to one another, more passionate and erotic together than they've ever been before. So she teaches couples together how to be more sexually confident, and this is called the Sexually Confident Couple. So there it is. I just wanted to mention these 2 resources, and these resources are offered by these beautiful, respected Christian women. And so if you are in the place where you're interested or open to the possibility of trying to become more sexual, more turned on, more erotic, more passionate than you've ever been. So I wanted to offer that in response to what this dear wife wrote in her letter to me, and the question that she asked several times throughout her letter: how do I make that desire come more frequently when I just don't want or enjoy sex more than once or twice a month? And just for the fun of it, I'm going to throw this out here. One extra thought that I'm going to end with, and I've talked about this before, but I just think that sometimes there can be an organic physical reason within a person's body, whether they are a man or a woman, that will help them become more aligned and more in tune with their own body, which can help them be more sexual maybe than they're accustomed to being. So I would encourage you, if you have a diminished sex drive, if you have no desire at all, to consider seeing your doctor, get a blood panel done, get a blood count done, and get your hormones checked. Estrogen, testosterone, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, all these different things that are going on inside of our bodies that can get out of whack and out of balance, and there's a disorientation, and that affects us in many different ways. It can affect our mood. It can lead to a proclivity toward depression, or I'm tired all the time. And it certainly can lead to a very diminished sex drive. So if you've never been checked out physically, I would highly recommend that. And I think it's a very practical, tangible step toward making sure that you're in a healthy and proper and functional relationship with your own body. And with that being said, you guys, there is one more point that I want to make before we finish today's podcast. And I know that I've gone really long here, and I am sorry about that, but I pray that you're encouraged and that the content is worth the time you're investing to listen to this episode. And actually, I know something that you don't know, and that is that I have the power to edit on my end. And I've actually come back and edited this particular episode a couple times already because I keep thinking of something else that I want to say. And I had the podcast completely finished and ready to go. And then I thought of another thing I want to say. So I'm coming back in and editing again. And this is the last point that I'm going to make before I finalize the podcast. And I want you to picture for a moment a scale from 1 to 10. And this scale is a sex scale, and it's like a passion scale. And 10 is the zenith. 10 is as good as it gets. 10 is the best sexual experience you've ever had in your life. It's when the stars align and everything is perfect. Like maybe it's your anniversary, so you go away for a special honeymoon weekend and you have a fancy dinner and you're relaxed and you're enjoying each other and laughing and you have a fine bottle of wine and then you have a romantic bubble bath and maybe you have some massage and you're enjoying each other and falling deeply and passionately toward one another. And it's like the proverbial fireworks are going off above you guys, and you make love, and it's this deep, arousing, passionate, erotic, wonderful, mysterious, beautiful, awesome experience. And you're thinking, this must be the best time we've ever made love. It could never be any better than this. It's electric sex. So that's what a number 10 is. And my point, you guys, is simply this, that every time you make love in your marriage with your spouse, it's not going to be a 10. It just isn't realistic. It's not going to be even an 8 or a 9 or a 10 every single time, right? Sometimes you might make love, and it was nice and it felt good, and you were present to each other, but it's like the fireworks weren't there. So at the end, if you were going to grade it, you might say, well, that was like a 5. It was okay, but it wasn't spectacular. And sometimes maybe it feels like a 2. And other times it might feel like an 8 or a 9 or a 10. And thank God for those 9s and 10s, because it's totally awesome when that happens. And it's this wonderful, awesome experience. And I think something that's kind of neat about this metaphor is that you never know for sure what you're going to get. So I was talking to the guys in my men's group about this, and one of the guys said it's kind of like getting a present for Christmas. And so you open up one present, and it's socks and underwear. But then you open another present, and it's this wonderful, awesome thing that you were so excited to get, and it's the most awesome gift you've ever got. So both of them are a gift, but one is like a little more special and a little more spectacular than the socks and the underwear. But the point I'm making is that when you open this gift, you never know for sure what you're going to get. And sometimes when you decide you're going to make love, I think maybe you come to it and it's kind of more out of a sense of duty, like I could take this or leave it, but I know that my husband really wants to do this, so I'll go ahead and do it. And the point being that maybe you start slow, but as you get into it, you start getting turned on, and you start feeling erotic, and you start feeling passion, and things heat up. And it started off as a 2 or 3, but it ends up an 8 or 9 or 10. And it becomes something that you weren't at all expecting it to be. You didn't start off that way. So what I'm saying is, I don't think that you always have to have the feelings up front. You don't have to feel like you're already in the place of a 9 or a 10. So now I'm so turned on and feel so erotic and so passionate. I'm already at a 10, so let's do this so it'll be a 10. It doesn't start off as a 10. You got to start with where you're at and get into it and give it a chance to be what it can be. And the reason that I'm saying all this is my last observation from this woman's letter. I have a sense from what she says several different times that I think her husband is like pressuring her for sex in a way that kind of can be uncool. So let me read a couple of the things that she says. She said here, it's not actually sex I hate, it's that the only thing wrong in our marriage is sex, and it's brought up more and more and more frequently. The presumption here is that her husband is bringing it up constantly, to the point that I hate discussing sex. I hate the pressure that it makes me feel. There's so much pressure on me and our relationship now associated with sex that I don't like it. And the more my husband brings up sex, the more averse to sex I become. He does this through different ways, by picking out a marriage book that's all about sex, by reading articles together on how important sex is for men, etc., etc. I know deep down that he truly wants to improve our marriage, but it feels like the only way that he's trying to do this is through sex, that the only way he measures the health of my love for him and the health of our marriage is through the frequency of good sex. She then goes on to say in another line, but having sex isn't enough. I have to be fully involved. He wants me to enjoy this as much as he does, but I do not. So it feels like her husband has a kind of expectation, maybe even a kind of silent demand, that he's bringing this up constantly or frequently, and it's putting a kind of pressure on her. And he's pressuring her even for the kind of sex that they have. He wants her to be fully involved and be into it and be erotic as much as he is. And then she goes on to say, for example, plus, if I say something like, do you want to have sex? He'll usually answer something like, well, do you? I don't want to do it if you're not going to be into it. And you see, again, that's kind of a silent demand. It's very much pressure. He's saying, if we're going to do this, then you need to be into it. You need to be hot. You need to be up at 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. And I think the wife who wrote this letter is interpreting this and experiencing her husband as applying a kind of pressure on her. And then finally, another line, she says, I know in my marriage the times our sexual relationship is the worst are the times my husband talks about it the most. So I just observe over and over again in this letter that her husband is like pressuring her. And he brings this up a lot, and she experiences this as a kind of pressure. And I think he's pressuring her for both the frequency of sex, but also the kind of sex they're having, because he doesn't want her to do it just to be doing it. He wants her to be hot and erotic and passionate and to be into it, and he wants it to be an 8 and a 9 and a 10. And I just want to make one other comment here. She mentions this concept of pornography at the end of the letter. She says a quick word about pornography, and she talks about how her husband has struggled for a long time with pornography. It's a horrible addiction. And she says he doesn't do this daily, weekly, or even monthly. He's never been unfaithful to her in that he's crossed the flesh barrier and become involved with another woman. But my observation is just this, that this husband has an issue with pornography. And we all know what's going on in the pornography, right? When you watch pornography, I'm not sure that it's a very honest representation of what real sex looks like between real people, because the women in pornography are always, they're kind of masculine. They're like men, right? They're totally hot. They're totally into it. They're totally erotic and passionate and turned on. And like they're up there at that level of a 9 and a 10. And if a guy is watching porn all the time, and porn is what's informing him about this is what sex should look like. This is what normal sex is. This is how a woman should be when she's having sex with her man. So therefore, this is how my wife should be. She should be totally into it. She should be hot and passionate and turned on. And so this husband maybe has a disorientation in his own heart and mind about what he's expecting his wife to be when she has sex with him. So guys, I'm just saying, I think this is something we need to be very aware of and very careful of, and that is that we're not pressuring our wife too much for sex. We're not placing a kind of demand upon her by constantly bringing it up. And number two, that we're not placing an unfair expectation upon her about the way she's supposed to be when she has sex with us. Maybe said another way, we can't demand that she be our own private little porn star, and she's going to be as hot and turned on and erotic as a porn star would be, because I just don't think that's realistic. And I want to give this woman a significant amount of credit who wrote this letter, because she acknowledges over and over again in several different ways that she is very willing to have sex with her husband, and she does have sex with her husband. She says, I'm not withholding my desire or sexuality in any way. We have sex at least twice a week. I understand how physically sex is a necessity for him, and I think for most men. And then she goes on to say to husbands, kind of like, maybe you shouldn't expect so much. Don't place such a demand upon your wife. And she says, if you feel like she's having sex just because she knows that you want it, take this as a way of her showing her love for you. So I just want to conclude this final point by stating this observation. I think sometimes it's not going to be an 8, a 9, or a 10, and sometimes your wife might be willing to have sex because she knows it's the right thing to do. She knows that it's a need that her husband has. She wants to be available and present to her husband, and I think it's totally awesome that she would be willing to do that, and I think it's okay for couples to be sexual and to be intimate and to enjoy each other and to not place a demand upon it that it has to be a 9 or a 10 every time, or that my wife has to be my own private little porn star. So I think her point is very well taken, that if a wife is willing to participate and be available to her husband sexually, even if the fireworks aren't going off, that maybe, guys, we can take that and be very appreciative and thankful and receive it in the same way that this woman says. Receive it as proof that your wife loves you, and therefore that would be a great blessing. And so with all that being said, I see that I'm way over for this particular podcast episode. I thank this dear sister very much for writing and sharing her heart, her mind, her thoughts with us. And I do pray that her letter might be helpful and encouraging for everybody who hears it, whether you're a man or a woman. Thank you so much for being here with me for this special episode of the Power of Purity podcast. I pray that you're able to come back next week, where I will continue with part 2 of my response to the man who wrote me the letter entitled, "Help, My Wife Doesn't Want Sex." Until then, be blessed. Have an awesome week. Have an awesome day. I love you guys. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.